Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Welcome to another installment in my series entitled, Is This Book as Bad as I Remember It? This is, I believe, the third installment of that series, and today we're going to be taking a look at Complete Mage. Complete Mage released in October of 2006, and at this point, we're about a year and a half out from the actual release of D&D 4th edition, and we've kind of reached the point in the 3rd edition or 3.5 timeline where they just put so much stuff out by this point, and with their focus shifting towards creating the next version of the D&D role-playing game, in this case 4th edition, it really felt like creatively they were kind of running out of gas. Like late 2006, especially into like 2007, which is the last full year that 3.5 was in production, there was just a lot of stuff that I didn't particularly think was worth spending money on. And this was one of the last books that I actually bought brand new. It wasn't the last book, but it was definitely among them. So today I wanted to actually take a look back because it's been, since shortly after this came out. So it's been almost 16 years, 15 and a half years, I guess, at the time that I'm recording this in March. But it's been so long since I've actually looked through this book. I have to wonder if maybe it's just, it's not as bad. Maybe I was just disappointed a bit in the format and never gave the book a proper chance. So we're going to flip through and we're going to take a look at what's inside here in a moment. This was, I believe, like the 7th in the complete series of books. Before that, you had books like Complete Warrior, Complete Divine, Complete Adventurer, Complete Psionic, and Complete Scoundrel. You also had Complete Arcane, which was one of the earlier books to come out. And right off the bat, honestly, I have to say, like I said, I kind of talked about the lack of, or sort of the diminishing creativity from Wizards of the Coast in late 2006 when it came to, 3.5. Again, this is when they would have been really heavy into developing and playtesting and working on D&D 4th edition. But just even taking a look at the covers here, they are so similar to each other that again, like when I saw the cover, I just remember looking at it and thinking that this was a really lazy just knockoff of a book that had already come out, which was one of the best books in the complete series. So you've got the spellcaster, sort of in this panel here with their familiar on their back, although this guy has a black cat. This one has 2 white rats, so I guess that's different. They're both clutching something in one hand, so we have a spell book here versus a staff in that hand, and they're also each holding a spherical or roundish object that is levitating above their outstretched palm. In this case, you have what sort of looks like the Eye of Sauron. I'm not going to say the Lord of the Rings movies were pretty popular back when this cover was likely designed, but I think the Lord of the Rings movies were pretty popular at the time that this cover was designed. But then you just have like the floating skull. And yeah, I just, it was just such a weird thing, like to look at these 2 books side by side. And just like, there's so many other things that I think that they could have done. They could have shown, a wizard scribing, runes, magical runes in the air, or they could have shown, just something other than like basically the exact same pose, only mirrored, and instead of, one familiar, they have like 2, and I don't know, it's just like I said, this was sort of the, for me, this was the first impression, right? And you only get to make a first impression once, and with this book, the immediate first impression that I got is like, wow, this is really lazy. So that's the front cover, and like I said, I guess you can't judge a book by its cover, but we're going to go through and we're going to take a look at some of the stuff that's in here in a moment. But I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about Complete Arcane, because like I said, this is one of the best complete books that was released for 3.5, and up to and excluding Complete Scoundrel, they were all really, really good books. Complete Warrior, Complete Divine, Complete Arcane, Complete Adventurer, and the Complete Psionics books were absolutely fantastic, and they all followed a very similar formula. I'm not going to flip through this entire book because, like I said, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I just kind of want to give you an idea of some of the stuff that we have here. So one of the first things that we have is Chapter 1, Classes. So until we got to Complete Scoundrel, each of the complete books had their own core classes that you could play that would take you from 1st to 20th level. And they were usually pretty cool concepts. So we had those, we had prestige classes. Now prestige classes were always a huge part of 3rd edition D&D, so it's not going to come as any surprise that, close to half the book or a good quarter of the book is taken up with just prestige classes. But then we've got new spells, magic items, some arcane monsters, and some information on arcane campaigns, including some of the different types of the classes that are introduced here, how you can sort of introduce them sort of into the world. So yeah, again, it was just a really, really cool book. The main thing that really set these early books apart, though, had to be the core classes, which was one of my favorite parts of looking through these complete books. There were so many really cool, classes and concepts here, including the very first, or I guess the first D20 version of the Warlock class. And it was just, again, it was a really cool class. It was kind of it was almost like, a clerical version of an arcane caster, except they didn't have the spells. They had their invocations and eldritch blasts and stuff like that, but they had better armor proficiencies, better weapon proficiencies, better base attack and save bonuses. It was just overall, like I said, it was just a really cool class to have. And then you had War Mage, which was probably the most used class in this book, at least in my own personal campaigns. And I actually had, in 2 back-to-back campaigns, I had 2 separate players on their own look over the player's handbook and then look through this book, and both independently decide that the War Mage was the class that they wanted to go with. And the War Mage was a really great class because it was a sorcerer, but you could actually use weapons and armor. You could actually cast spells without worrying about spell failure in certain types of armor. There were feats that could expand that. But you also got to do some really cool things like add your intelligence modifier to damaging spells. You focused mainly on evocation spells for the purposes of this class, but that was one of the main things that people tended to focus on back in these days anyway. There were substitution features that you could take for this class, which allowed you to choose a spell from a different school. And if you did, you just simply cast it as if it was 1 level higher. So if you took, for example, if you picked a 2nd level transmutation or divination spell, as your advanced learning, which allows you to take extra spells that aren't on your normal class list. If you used that and sort of, I think it was a feat called eclectic learning or a substitution feature, but regardless, if you took like a 2nd level divination spell, for example, and you use that and added it to your spell list, it would just simply become a 3rd level spell, and then you could cast it spontaneously like you could everything else. They had a good assortment of spells. They had the sudden abilities, so they could duplicate some of the meta magic feats. This was just a really good class. And like I said, the classes, the core classes, even though it's not a huge section of the book, was always one of the best parts of this book. So some really cool stuff there. And this was sort of like the standard that Complete Mage would have to live up to. And that was what I was expecting. That was what I was looking for. That's what I wanted at this point in time. So the question is, now there's no core classes in this book. I can tell you that right off the bat. So I guess the question is the other material in here worth having in exchange for a few more core classes or extra prestige classes and things like that? So let's just go ahead and actually take a look through, because like I said, I haven't looked through this book in over a decade. So I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on each page, but we'll go through and see what we have here. Some information on arcane magic, arcane versus divine magic, arcane versus innate. So innate magic being like sorcerer's abilities to cast spontaneously. Arcane, I guess, in this particular instance being you meant to refer to like a mage who actually has to, or a wizard that actually has to like prepare their spells very specifically. Information on the origin of the warlock, which is actually kind of neat. And it looks like this is actually just almost like an historical sort of look. It mentions the D&D by name, so it's kind of strange to go back and look at some of these because I'm so used to like with the D&D 5th edition books, where most of the stuff is technically presented as being told by an NPC like Mordekainen, Fizban, Xanathar. So it's just kind of interesting to actually see just more of like, you know, this is just the history of the class and how it fits into the D&D world. So that's actually kind of neat. Information on spell schools and school specialization, you know, prohibited schools, personality stuff. So this is actually, honestly, you know, some pretty cool information to have if you're not already, you know, well familiar with those concepts. I think the fact that this was released near the end of 3.5 may, you know, kind of be the reason why at the time I really didn't take this information into consideration, because it was just stuff that I had known and had sort of already been very, you know, well versed in, you know, by the time that this came out. But yeah, it's actually kind of cool to have like personality information on the different, you know, specialists for each of the different schools of magic. You know, sort of like their outlooks and philosophies. So I gotta say that's kind of neat. Arcane archetypes. So again, this is just looking at it. I have to say we may have finally found a book that's not as bad as I remember it. But we got the arcane archetypes. We have blasters, which is basically like evocation, you know, damage dealing DPS. If I'm going to, you know, borrow a term from like MMOs and stuff like that. Again, talks about the personality of them. You know, their strengths, weaknesses, the best classes if you want to have that style of gameplay, and it even recommends prestige classes from Complete Arcane, which is kind of cool. So we have the blaster. Oh, there's more stuff here. So there's, you know, what feats. This is basically kind of a guidelines on just how to create your character, things to keep in mind, things to you know, again, things to take, things to avoid. So, like the best spells for each of the levels. It's actually kind of neat. And then you got like the booster, which is more or less like a support character. So someone that casts spells to enhance the abilities of others. So again, you get all that information. Controller. Actually, what's interesting is that controller. Again, you can kind of tell. You can kind of tell that fourth edition, like I said, this is when they're working on fourth edition, because controller is actually a design philosophy that is used for the wizard class in fourth edition. So you had things like leaders. Then you had what was it? It was like leaders. Then there was like controllers was another one. I forget what the other terms were. But yeah, so you got controller there. So it's interesting. Like I said, that's kind of the philosophy that they used for fourth edition, because in fourth edition, the wizard can sort of manipulate enemies or manipulate the battlefield using some of their spells. So I think that's why they sort of gave them like the controller type. The generalist, so if you don't want to hyper focus on anything, you just want to be able to do kind of a little bit of everything. The necromaster. Some interesting artwork there. The sniper. I know people that would love to, that, you know, so I had someone in a third edition game. They wanted to specialize in ray spells and like take feats, and they were like I think they were like an arcane trickster or something like that, and they focused on ray spells. And yeah, the idea behind it was that they wanted to be a sniper. So yeah, again, that's kind of neat. You got like the spells that they can sort of look at. Two classes from Complete Arcane, the Warlock and the War Mage, make ideal snipers. So it actually does have a bit of nice synergy with the Complete Arcane book. So, you know, honestly, so far, looking back, you know, and again, I know this was like information I kind of took for granted back in 2006. Keep in mind, I was only into like RPGs for a few years at this point. But yeah, looking back, this is actually just really cool information to have. You got like someone who likes to focus on summon spells, someone who likes to use arcane magic in addition to like warrior skills. So it mentions like the Eldritch Knight. Okay, so you know what? Like this first chapter It's actually really good, I have to say. Um, I guess, like I said, I think I judged this book a little harshly. We're only a little bit into it though, so let's continue, shall we? So here we get into alternative class features. So this is essentially, and so what this is you take abilities from the regular like classes or other classes, and they usually replace something. So let's just take a look here. It'll be easier to actually like use an example here. So we have Arcane Hunter. So this is a ranger class. So rangers learn to track and hunt creatures of a certain type. When choosing a favorite enemy, some rangers concern themselves less with what a creature is and more what it does. These rangers learn to identify the signs of the arcane and make it their business to combat those who use arcane magic in opposition to their goals. So class ranger, it's a first level ability. Special requirement, you have to have 1 rank in knowledge arcana. And at first level, you do not select a favored enemy from table 2-3 in the player's handbook. At 5th, 10th, 15th, and 20th, you choose normally. So basically you lose your first level's choice of favorite enemy, but the benefit is at first level, you gain favorite enemy arcanists. This feature works like favorite enemy in the player's handbook. The bonuses granted apply to any character capable of casting arcane spells or using invocations, but not spell-like abilities. So you get like the +2 bonus on damage to anyone that uses like spells. If they had spell-like abilities, so certain classes had this innate magic that's not technically magic, it's something that's innate to them. It's a little bit different than the innate magic of a sorcerer, but they were labeled specifically as spell-like abilities. So those don't count, but if they could use spells or invocations, it could. So it kind of replaces some of that stuff. So again, some of these are kind of interesting. Arcane, I will say that having like the +2 bonus to damage against just anyone who can use spells, arcane spells, arcane magic. It's a little bit different than having to specify like a particular race of humanoids or like giants or undead. Like, I don't know, it's something that might be, I don't want to say it's going to unbalance things, but you also have to remember whenever you gain another use of favorite enemy or another choice of favorite enemy, so 5th, 10th, 15th, and 20th, you get a +2 bonus in the new favorite enemy that you choose, but you also get an additional +2 bonus that you could put into either a previous favorite enemy or the one that you just chose. So you could, in theory, get like +10 damage against arcane, like anyone who can use arcane spells. So it depends on the type of campaign. It's not necessarily super overpowered, but it is something that I guess you would have to kind of think about, I would say, before introducing it into your campaign. But again, these are alternate things. You should always discuss them with your dungeon master anyway, because they, for example, if the campaign, well, I guess if the campaign actually revolved around like an army, an evil army that relies heavily on spellcasters, it might actually make sense. I don't know. I guess I'm on the fence a little bit about it. It's something that I could see being abused, only because I had players when I first started getting into D&D who would absolutely take advantage of anything and everything. But my last group that I was running for years with 3.5, I don't think they would have gone that far with it. So it's probably not as bad. I guess I just my shields are up when it comes to some of this stuff. But yeah, so we got the different alternate class features. A wizard describes preparing a spell, so there's a little sidebar that you can read. Some of these are actually kind of interesting as well. So you got reserve feats. So it's a new type of feat. Reserve feats' primary benefits is a supernatural ability usable at will. Okay. So we have like acidic splatter. Here's a reserve feat. Prerequisite ability to cast second level spells. As long as you have an acid spell of second level or higher available to cast, you can throw an orb of acid as a ranged touch. The attack has a range of 5 feet per level and or per level of the highest level acid spell you have available to cast, and deals 1d6 points of damage per level of that acid spell. As a secondary benefit, you gain a +1 competence bonus to your cast level when casting acid spells. That's not so bad. This is again, it's kind of one of those weird things. Like I feel the influence of fourth edition just a little bit here, because this ability, as long as you have an acid spell, readied or in your repertoire, and you still have a spell slot of that level, basically, or if you prepared it specifically because you're a wizard and you haven't cast it yet, then you can use this acid orb at will. So it kind of feels like, again, it's a way of introducing a form of at-will abilities to the to 3.5. Although there's there's more of a caveat to them. Like once you use the spell, if you don't have any of those spells remaining, then by the sounds of it, you don't get to use the ability anymore until you prepare spells again. So, again, interesting stuff. Heritage feats. So these are just feats tied to essentially like a bloodline. Looks like they give you certain abilities like the Fey Presence. Heritage feat. You gain spell-like abilities, usable once per day. Meta Magic Spell Trigger. Meta Magic School Focus. I don't know. I guess they're all right. 3.5 was huge on feats. Books. Every book that came out basically had a ton of feats. So it is what it is. All right, so we're getting into the prestige classes. I think we're at the point when this book came out. I want to say that prestige classes tended to have a little bit more thought put into them. In previous books, including actually a Complete Arcane, they would just have like a ton of them. Any kind of idea that they could think of that they could turn into a prestige class, they would. But there was very little thought put into like, how does this make sense for your campaign world? How do you integrate it? I think we're past that point here. Yeah, so this is the point where we actually have, instead of it just being like the class, the prerequisites, and the description of their abilities and nothing else to really go off of, you actually have, a ton of information here. Information on how to play them, how to advance through their organization, how to incorporate them into the world, an example of them. So this was at the point where prestige classes were more carefully considered, or at least there was they actually incorporated more of how to integrate them than the previous books. So I know I said that we were kind of at the point where a lot of the creativity was kind of zapped from the writers. But the one thing that was an exception to that at this point in time was definitely the way that they treated prestige classes. And I think that's the way they should have been doing it from the beginning. Instead of just focusing on quantity, they actually started focusing on quality. That's not to say that the classes were necessarily things that I'd still be interested in, but I do appreciate the fact that they've spent a little bit more time just integrating them into like the D&D campaign world, as opposed to just like, oh well, here's an idea based on a movie we saw last night, kind of thing. But prestige classes are prestige classes. They were my least favorite aspect of 3.5. So even in like books like Complete Arcane, Complete Warrior, Complete Divine, like all those books. The prestige classes were still ones that I barely spent any time on, just because, I don't know, I was just never a huge... I think it was a cool concept, but they went way overboard, and I was completely burnt out on them by the time that like they actually started really thinking about them. The Ultimate Magus. Okay, this one I actually kind of want to take a little bit of a look at because that sounds kind of interesting. Alright, so sorcerers channel unnoble powers, and wizards are an expert in ancient lore, but few individuals have as thorough an understanding in mastery of arcane magic as the Ultimate Magus, or Magus, or whatever you want to pronounce it. By combining both sorceress and wizardly abilities into a unified whole, they empower themselves in ways even the greatest archmage can't duplicate. Okay, so requirements. You have to have 4 ranks in Knowledge Arcana and 8 ranks in Spellcraft. That's your skill points. If you're an Arcane caster, that's really easy to get. Any meta magic feat, again, if you're an Arcane caster, that's a really easy thing because Wizards at certain levels just gained bonus feats that they could choose meta magic from, and in general, they were just meta magic feats that if you were a caster, you really wanted to have. So you have to have spellcasting, the ability to spontaneously cast first level arcane spells, and to be able to prepare and cast second level arcane spells from a spell book. So you have to be, you had to have been at least fourth level before you could start taking this class, because you had to have level 1 as a sorcerer, basically, and then you had to get up to level 3 as a wizard, because at level 3 as a wizard, that's when you can prepare level 2 spells. The word level is used a lot in D&D. So basically you had to have been like 4th level by the time, like, before you can even think about this class. So you would start this essentially at 5th level and going forward. But you gain +1 level of lower, or +1 of lower level existing arcane casting class. So that's a bit convoluted. So a lot of prestige classes, if they were built for arcane or spell casting characters, they would give you +1 level in your existing spell casting class. So again, this one's a little bit weird because you get like +1 level in your lower level ones. So if you were a first level sorcerer, third level wizard, and you took your first level of this class, then the +1 to your lower level existing arcane spellcasting class would be sorcerer, and then you get 1, and then after that it's based on spontaneous or prepared, and then it's +1 to lower again. It's like, yeah, it's a little bit convoluted. I don't think they needed to necessarily go that way. Honestly, if they just would have had it so that it was, because some of them will give you +1 to both, right? So there's like the Mystic Thurge, which is a multi-class like cleric and wizard. As you progress through that prestige class, it just gives you +1 level, a caster level, to both of those classes. So if you were like a 5th level, if you were like a 5th level wizard, 5th level cleric, and then you were a 1st level Mystic Thurge, then you would be able to cast spells and prepare spells as a 6th level wizard and a 6th level cleric, if that makes any sense. So a little bit convoluted how they go about doing that. And then we got arcane spell power. So at 1st level, your caster level for all arcane spells increases by +1, and then it continues. So it gets up to a maximum +4. So, again, I guess that's all right. That would also be accomplished, though. So your caster level really doesn't necessarily mean how you prepare spells. It's what they are in terms of like difficulty classes, or in terms of like for things like dispel magic. If you were a wizard of a certain level, right, it might be easier or harder to overcome it. So that's kind of what that is. Expanded spell knowledge at 2nd level, you can select 1 0 level or 1st level arcane spell from your spell book, add to the list of arcane spells. Okay, so you can kind of split your spell casting. You can sort of use that to split your spell book a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. It's okay. It's not as good as I thought it was going to be when I kind of looked at it. Again, I think it's a little bit convoluted how they handle gaining a level in the prestige class and how it affects your pre-existing spellcasting classes. Like the unseen seer, for example, here, it's just +1 level of existing spellcasting class. So if you were a 5th level wizard, took 1 level of the unseen seer, you would actually be able to cast and prepare spells as if you were a 6th level wizard instead of the 5th level one. So yeah, again, it's prestige classes. They're kind of wonky. The Wild Soul, are these the ones that can kind of get like druid stuff? Maybe not. Okay. And then we get like new spells and invocations. The polymorph subschool. Oh my god. So this is a flashback and a half. So one of the things with 3rd edition that I will say was an issue basically from day one up until like the very, very end, was the fact that polymorph was kind of broken, might not be the right term, but it was complicated, like needlessly complicated. And so eventually they started creating these sidebars here on the polymorph subschool, which tried to create like a standardized set of rules for polymorph type of spells, because there were some like spells that would polymorph you in a way that would give you like some of the beneficial stuff, or it would give you some supernatural abilities, and then there were other ones that didn't. There was just a lot to it. It was weird. Like the Druid's Wild Shape was logistically frustrating to deal with. So the polymorph subschool was something that was trying to fix that, and it's one of those things that it kind of got like updated and sort of changed and redefined in almost every book that had spells. Even the 3.5, the reprints that came out in like 2012, they actually have the polymorph subschool, the kind of sidebar here. It actually has it at the back of the player's handbook. Yeah, it was just I kind of forgot about it, and it just brought it all back. Yeah, the spells are what they are: adamantine wings, allied footsteps, animate weapon, bloodletting. All right, let's just take a quick look at it. So Cat's Feet is level 1 Assassin, level 1 Bard, level 1 Hexblade. This is the one we're looking at here. It's a duration, so you cast it, it's like an instantaneous, so it takes effect right away. When you cast this spell, you can immediately reroll a balance, jump, climb, or move silent check that you have just rolled. The second roll gains a +5 insight bonus, and you must, so it's kind of an early version of Advantage. It's interesting to see how some of these like older concepts became integrated into later versions. You don't get the +5 bonus in with Advantage in 5e, but the interesting thing about Advantage in 5e is that if it's a passive ability that you would gain advantage on for some sort of circumstance, it actually is supposed to give you, I think, like a +5 bonus. So it's just a static bonus that it applies. At least I'm pretty sure I read that. I'm pretty sure that's how that works. So it's kind of neat because this one gives you both a +5 and a second roll. Although this one you have to take the second result regardless. But it's just kind of interesting to see how some of these things end up kind of evolving over time. Dreaded Form of the Eye Tyrant. It is a polymorph spell, so I think we're just gonna move on. One of these days I'll have to do a video on polymorph. I just don't know if I want to do that kind of research and break my brain right now, but it's definitely interesting. Oh, wait, whoa. A storm of fire and ice. Interesting. Not a song of fire and ice, but a storm of fire and ice. Definitely, you can definitely tell there's probably some inspiration there. Maybe get some new magic items. The artwork for these is, kind of cool, I guess. Quill of Scribing. Material components, okay. Angel Down. Popular lore has it that this fluffy golden material is reputedly made up of the pin feathers from celestials' wings. In fact, it is a pollen gathered from various rare flowers found growing on the upper plains. Okay. When an Angel Down is used as a component in an abjuration spell, the spell's duration is doubled as if affected by the extend spell. I was kind of hoping that it would be like something that helped with like resurrection magic, like a Phoenix Down, but I guess that's not the case. Devil's Eye. You know, it's cool to see material components get a bit of a focus there. There's not a ton of them, but it is kind of cool to have. It's something that I always felt was kind of overlooked with spellcasting in these editions. Even nowadays, like, it feels like, spell components aren't really thought about or used that often. And then Arcane Adventures, 100 ideas for adventure ideas for Arcane. Let's just take a look at a few of these. So 14 is a war or other calamity makes a certain rare spell component even more difficult to contain than usual or obtain than usual. Okay. A prominent citizen or member of the nobility was secretly polymorphed into an animal and hidden away in the country. Yeah, okay. These are always kind of cool. A dragon threatens to ravage a city or a town unless someone can teach it a new spell. All right, cool. Dragon spellcasting wasn't hugely versatile in 3rd edition, but still kind of neat. A rogue employs one or more simulacrums to provide her with an alibi after committing a spectacular. That one I like. That one I actually really like. The simulacrum spell does not get used enough in modern day, so that is awesome. I like that one. A desperate spellcaster must recover his lost body before his magic star spell wears off. That'd be kind of cool. A wizard's tower becomes infested with ethereal filters, and the owner needs help driving them out. A group of driders takes over the catacombs under a temple. So this is actually, again, that's kind of neat. Anytime you get like these idea charts, they're great. Like, obviously not every single one is going to knock it out of the park. Some of these are going to be pretty well based on like kind of cliches, like somebody kidnaps a sorcerer or wizard's familiar. But they're good plot devices. They're good things that you can build an adventure around. So yeah, that's nothing wrong with that at all. I like that. Information on, so magic item shops. Identifying magic items behind magical locations as treasure. Okay. Okay, so you get some... All right, let's take a look at one here. Okay, so... Big Bacob's reading room. So Bacob is the Greyhawk god of magic. So... What's the benefit here? Special ability. Okay, so upon drawing forth the power of Bacob's reading room, a spellcaster who prepares spells can write one new spell of any level he can cast into his spell book. Doing this requires 1 hour, and there is no cost for materials except for the required pages in the spell book. A spellcaster who employs spellbooks cannot benefit from the same Bacob's reading room more than once per year. Okay, so it's a way to get a free spell into your spell book. That's fine. Like I said, it's a cool concept. I will say. Meta Magic Storm kind of almost reminds me a little bit of Wild Magic from Forgotten Realms. And there you go. Okay. An ad for 3 Dragon Ante. And that is... Oh, was there an ad for something here too? Yeah, so an ad for some Eberron books. And yeah, there you go. Okay. So, Complete Mage. So this was the book that drove me away from the Complete series, even though there's only going to be one more book in that product line. And the question is, so far... with this series, the Sonic's Handbook for 3.0 was the first video that I did, and I felt like the book was actually technically worse than I remember it. Libris Mortis was about the same, but I gotta be honest, Complete Mage, once I kind of got past the fact that like the cover was basically a complete and total knockoff of Complete Arcane, I have to say, looking back at this book now in 2022 versus how I felt about it in 2006, I definitely judge this book a little bit harshly. Now, don't get me wrong, things like the prestige classes, which was still, it was still a big section of the book, even though there weren't a ton of them. It was still probably, again, one of the weakest aspects of it. The spells, the spells were all right. The feats were okay. There were some interesting concepts. I like the idea of like the reserve feats, which give you essentially a minor at will ability as long as you have, a particular condition met, like having a certain spell still available to cast, things like that. I think that's kind of a neat concept. So that's all right. But for me, I think the best part of this book is probably the part that it was my least favorite aspect of it when I first got the book. And that was the opening section talking about like the different schools of magic, the different forms of arcane magic, describing what specialist wizards that, tend to fall into one of the schools of magic, like sort of their philosophy, their outlook on things, their personality traits, they're like just all that kind of information about them. I think that was really cool. The play styles of people who make arcane characters, like the blaster, the controller, the summoner, steps, things to keep in mind when creating those types of characters. What classes work best, if you're going to like multi-class, or just which ones might be the best way to start with something like that. The spells that you may want to consider taking, the feats that you may want to consider taking, the feats that you want to probably avoid taking. Like, that's actually a really good section of the book. And I don't think I just really truly appreciated that part of it back in the day. Everything that came after that was okay, like I said, sort of at best. I don't know how much of it I would introduce into my actual campaigns. But that was kind of the same for prestige classes and just slews of feats from these books anyway, was that, you kind of always had to be careful how much stuff you just, allow or introduce into your game. Because the more things that are thrown in there, the more it has a chance to adversely interact or unbalance things. And, third edition and 3.5 kind of had this whole throw everything at the wall and see what sticks kind of mentality, especially, in the later years, with stuff like this. But yeah, the first part of the book is, again, it was the part that I just really didn't care about back then because, I didn't want guidelines on how to create certain types of characters, or I already knew, kind of from personal experience, what like different spellcasting classes, how their practitioners tended to represent themselves. I just don't think I appreciated that aspect of the book. So that part was actually really, really good, and I definitely did not give it a fair shake back in 2006. Everything else, like I said, fair to middle ground for most of it. That one prestige class, the true magus or magus or however you pronounce it, that looked really cool until I started looking at like the way that they handled leveling up and how it affected your multi-class spellcasting, progression. That was just like that was just too much for me. But yeah, it's definitely not as bad as I remember, and yeah, I kind of wish I wasn't quite as quick to dismiss it as I was, because this definitely doesn't deserve the hatred that I gave towards it. And I have to say, it's really nice to actually find a book that's the way that I can feel about it after all these years. I don't think it's necessarily a situation where my dislike for it grew over time to the point where it sort of became this like out of control, monster in my brain or something like that. But it's nice to know that like my sensibilities or, my appreciation for certain types of flavor text has definitely changed over the years. And, I went from someone who just wanted, some cool stuff that I could throw into my campaigns, to someone who really appreciates the almost like the psychological approach to like, how certain characters might act, and, how their choices, the things that they focus on, can sort of affect that. So I think that that's a really cool aspect of the book. So it makes me kind of curious now to revisit Complete Scoundrel and see if that book's really as bad as I remember, because That was the one, as much as Complete Mage was sort of like the straw that broke the camel's back for me back in 2006. Complete Scoundrel is the other like several tons of weight that was already there before that last straw hit. So I might have to do another one of these videos for that book in the future. I don't think that's going to be the next one that I focus on, just because I like to sort of just grab things more or less at random, or try not to focus too much on a particular series or subset of books at a time, so I can get sort of, again, fresh perspectives and stuff like that. But it's definitely got me intrigued to wonder if maybe I was too harsh on that book too. But Complete Mage, honestly, I would almost go so far as to say that if you're someone who loves playing arcane spellcasters or spellcasting characters in general, and you're looking to get into like 3.5 in today's age, I would recommend Complete Mage before Complete Arcane, because this book gives you some great advice on different playstyles and what things to consider for your character, whereas this one is essentially just like options and expanding what's available to you. Whereas this one, especially like I said, that first part of the book really focuses on just giving you, information. Not abilities, not options, but just information that you can use to create characters, or to have an idea of what to consider when creating that kind of character. So yeah, I think Complete Mage is definitely better than I remember it, and I'm glad that it only took 3 videos into the series to find one of those books. So yeah, I definitely have to apologize to this book, because I definitely judged it harshly. And the aspects of the book that I'm still kind of ho-hum on are aspects of all 3.5 books that I've been ho-hum on since like 2000, when 3rd edition first came out. So I can't really fault this one book for that. So yeah, definitely check it out. I believe you can get like the PDF version of this on Drive-Thru RPG or DM's Guild. But yeah, it's definitely worth checking out. It's definitely worth the read. If nothing else, read that first section. The prestige classes, the feats, the spells, magic items, all that stuff. You can take it or leave it. But the actual guidelines to different arcane spellcasters, schools of magic, their specialists, like all that stuff, that's definitely worth a read, and something that could give you some good ideas even today for, I dare say, even something like 5th edition, even though like spells and feats are not going to be the same as they were back then. But yeah, cool book. So there you go. Let me know in the comments below. Did any of you pick up Complete Mage back in the day? What were your thoughts on it at the time? Did you kind of judge it harshly because of Complete Arcane? Or was it just at the point where 3rd edition was kind of not putting out the best stuff, so your expectations were kind of low to begin with? Or let me know if this was a book that you absolutely loved and that you used in your campaigns. Let me know all that stuff in the comments below. Anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you all next time. Take care.